My name is Larry Bodine. I'm the president, and I'll be your host today. We have a wonderful speaker coming up, Camaron Stevenson, who is the editor of the Copper Courier news publication. He has been with the Copper Courier since 2019 when it first launched. And it's an Arizona-based media outlet focused on civic engagement, which we certainly need more reporting about. He is located in Phoenix, and he's worked in local news and politics for the last 10 years, both as a journalist and on several campaigns. He has 2 children who attend public school in the Valley, and he takes a special interest in issues surrounding education, affordability, and creating a more equitable democracy. And with that, Camaron, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me out to talk with all of you today. Been a big fan of your work down in Tucson and Blog for Arizona in general for several years. I think you do a great job giving a voice to a lot of candidates who otherwise don't get any attention or coverage in a lot of races that are more important than people give credit for. So thank you for being here and for participating in our democracy. But like Larry said, I'm managing editor for the Copper Courier. We're a progressive newsroom focused on civic engagement. And what that means is, we as reporters and journalists, we accept and embrace our personal biases, who we are as reporters. I'm a very ideologically, I'm progressive left, but I acknowledge that doesn't necessarily have to have an impact on how I report the news or how our team reports the news. We report facts, we report accuracy, we call it hypocrisy, regardless of who's spouting lies or who is spreading misinformation. Our main focus as an organization is civic engagement, not just reporting about what's happening in our elections, but giving and empowering people, our readers and our audience, with the information they need to participate in our democracy. We see over the years that a lot of things as far as voter engagement and voter outreach becomes more complicated. There's a lot of restrictions on voting, who can vote, when they can vote. Those sort of laws, unfortunately, aren't going away, and it seems like they're being proposed with higher and higher veracity. And so our goal is to reach the people who those laws or proposed laws are targeting. We want to let people know what their options are. We also do a lot of work to get news to people who are susceptible to misinformation. I would imagine everyone here is fairly well informed on what's going on. You're here in the middle of the day, and so you're probably very politically minded, very active civically. But most people aren't. Most people, especially in Arizona, are working multiple jobs. They have families. They're I don't care whether you're in Tucson or Phoenix. Our transit systems aren't great. They're probably making sure their car works. They're trying to find a way to get to work. Struggling to get by in a lot of different ways, and don't have time to follow the nitty-gritty daily rigmarole of what's going on in politics. Most people don't know that there isn't going to be a gubernatorial debate, but they do know Carrie Lake's name because she's been on the news for 20 years. They may not be familiar with what happened on January 6th, but they don't like authoritarianism. But there's a lot of candidates and a lot of elected leaders in office here in Arizona who support things like the insurrection, who support taking away the ability for Arizonans to choose who they want to be president, where their electoral votes go. But they don't necessarily put that on billboards and put that in their ad campaigns. They put very basic things, I'm a Republican conservative who puts America first. And to a lot of people, that's enough information to say, I like America. I'm, I'm, fiscally conservative or what have you. And they may not know of all the nuances of what these candidates actually believe and what they want to do. And so we feel it's our responsibility as members of the free press, while we still exist, to get the information that people need the way that they are able to consume it. And to that end, a lot of our reporting, while it is online on our website, we do most of our reporting through social media. Because again, the majority of people, they're not going to azcentral.com. They're probably also not going to coppercourier.com. But they are on Instagram. They're on Facebook. They're on TikTok and Twitter. Well, kind of on Twitter. But they're on these, they're on social media apps. And so we've developed a lot of really unique ways to report the news on, on social media apps that feel very native to the rest of their social feed. So people can be informed, they can be enlightened, and most of all, they can feel empowered. Because one of the things we also try and do is give people a purpose with our reporting. It's very easy to read what's going on in the news and get depressed or feel hopeless. And so a lot of what we aim to do is, if we're reporting on these threats to our democracy, or threats on women's reproductive rights, or threats on our electoral system, we also want to let people know how they can be engaged, how they can do something about it. And all of you are here today, so I imagine you made that choice either today or a long time ago to be civically engaged, no matter how hard it gets. And our goal is to encourage other people to do the same, because our democracy is only as effective as we allow it to be. And there are people who are actively and vocally trying to whittle away at our democratic process. And so our goal is to protect Arizonans against those attacks. But yeah, that's my rambling spiel to introduce myself. I can open it to questions at this point, or I can talk a little bit more about our reporting, or if there's anything specific anyone would like to know about Courier as a whole.
One of the things I was going to ask you about is, tell me about your coverage of all the efforts to end hand count, end voting machines and introduce human error by requiring the ballots be counted by hand, and that voting by mail would be outlawed, and instead we'd have to show up at the polls. What information do you have about the possibility of that all taking place?
Well, I mean, the first thing I can tell you is that all of those proposals you mentioned are immensely unpopular. 80% of Arizonans in most elections, and 90% in 2020, use voting by mail in some form, or they voted early in some way. There's no proof that it's not effective. The majority of Arizonans trust our electoral system, and it's just a very loud, vocal minority who doesn't like how our system works because it's not working for them, because their proposals or their candidacies have not been popular, so they lost the vote. That being said, those things could realistically happen. Our legislature right now is majority Republican. Most Republicans are running on their own unique brand of voter integrity in one form or another, which is anything from hand counting millions of ballots to getting rid of same-day vote, getting rid of early voting entirely, which I believe, like, it's been proven that both of those proposals together are mathematically impossible. There's not enough people to count all of those votes in one day. And so I think a lot of those things would be challenged in courts if they did pass. But I do think it's important to keep in mind that a lot of Republicans who support early voting aren't going to be in the legislature next session. People like Rusty Bowers, who, for all of faults, he was against the Cyber Ninja's partisan review of the election. He supports early ballots. He was voted out in his primary by someone who is all for those things. And so if Republicans maintain control of the legislature, that is a more extreme form of Republican control than we've seen in the past, which is likely, to be honest. There's some districts where there aren't Democrats running at all. There are some districts where there's a strong representation of Republicans who will vote for the Republican candidate no matter what. It's not impossible, but as far as the legislature, it's going to be tough, which is where the other elected positions are so vital, which is where, having a former Secretary of State as our governor who understands the electoral process, spent, her tenure in office defending it, I think that's vitally important. I also think someone who ran Maricopa County's elections in 2020, a process that, even though it has been attacked for years, it was seen as the most viable and most effective, most efficient early voting system in the country at the time. There were several national reports about Adrian Fontes and what he's done to the Maricopa County's office. And so I think having those two in statewide office would go a long way to protect our electoral process. And then, farther down the ballot, county attorneys who support election integrity as we know it to be. And then all the way down to, attorneys general at, local and state level who won't do needless political theater investigations like our current attorney general does. It is possible those things can be taken away. I think we would see like a Roe v. Wade type of backlash if that were to happen. But I think realistically, if people are engaged this cycle, if they're aware in very simple terms that, early voting can be taken away, I think enough people can be elected into office to prevent, those changes happening to our election system.
All right, let's go to Steve Early. Steve has got a question on his mind. Go ahead and unmute Steve.
We went to an organizational meeting called Ground Game Arizona on Saturday, and that was to go over the initiatives that are on the ballot. And the person that was presenting Prop 130 called it a Trojan horse because of the ramifications of it. And I was wondering if you could give us your take on it. And 130 is the one about the veterans texts.
I got to be completely honest with you. I'm not fully caught up on all the ones that will be on the ballot, so I probably wouldn't feel comfortable speaking on it right now. But I can look it up and send you some of our reporting once we do some breakdowns on it.
Let's turn to Susie Anderson. Go ahead, Susie.
My question is, you brought it up. How do you do your reporting? How do you find the stories and get to the nitty-gritty about what we need to know about?
Yeah, that's a great question. And a lot of what we do, our reporters here, we recognize that, I'm a lifelong Arizonan. Most of us have lived here for at least, 5 or 6 years. But we recognize that there are a lot of organizations who have been on the ground doing the work to help people with access to affordability and voting rights and reproductive rights a lot longer than any of us have even been alive. So we do a lot of work with local grassroots organizations to talk with them about, either people that they have been in contact with or people that they help, so that we can amplify voices of those who otherwise normally aren't getting a chance to speak. We then go on the ground, we talk to people one-on-one. We rely a lot on source recommendations. If someone has a story idea, we're very open to pitches, but we do vet our sources as well to make sure that they're reliable people we can talk to and report on what they're discussing.
All right, George Beverly has his hand up. Go ahead, George.
Thank you, sir, for taking your time to come to speak with us. Like always, we're always talking about people being ousted about voting, and especially in the protected class peoples, we always find ourselves lacking in not only in information but the resources in enabling to vote. My question is what is your organization doing to reach out to the people of color and getting them involved in the news sources based off of their own community needs and their concerns? And then the second question would be, do you do live interviews with people of color who actually participate inside of the electoral processes?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for asking that. A lot of this kind of goes back to our sourcing. We tend to work with mutual aid groups, organizations that do support the uplifting of Black voices, Latino voices, Indigenous voices, people of color who normally get overlooked in a lot of instances. So we do work with, we do get sourcing from Black Lives Matter, Put It in Action, La Familia Vota, a lot of organizations that are investing heavily in Arizonans and getting people of color in Arizona to vote. and to be civically engaged. We also do. We also have a lot of our articles translated into Spanish because there is a lot of misinformation in Spanish media, so that it can then get disseminated to people who need it the most. I hope that answered your question.
Right, let's move to Gail Camaron, who I just saw at the UDL dinner. Go ahead and unmute, Gail, and ask your question.
Yeah, what is the best way to access or subscribe to or otherwise support the Copper Courier?
Always love to hear that question. So we do have a daily newsletter. If you go to coppercourier.com, there's an option to subscribe to it. That's probably the most, and our associate editor, Jessica Swarner's here. She just linked it in the chat. But that's our daily newsletter. That's a very easy way to passively get our information. We also are on, like I mentioned, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and any other social media platform that I'm blanking on. And so if you're also on those platforms, follow us there, share our news when we report on it. We deal a lot with, like I said, getting our news out on social media. And so if people are sharing it, then the word gets out. So yeah, definitely give us a follow.
All right, let's turn to Mike Bryan, who's been monitoring questions in the chat. Go right ahead, Mike.
Paul Stapleton Smith says, Cameron, please, thank you for your work and this presentation. How would you describe the context of real power in our economy, our courts, and Congress? Specifically, how do unions exert effective power for our working families?
Is this in relation just to building power, like a more powerful and more prominent labor movement in Arizona?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I could talk about that all day. It's incredible just to see how much labor has, how much power has grown among the labor movement here in Arizona and across the country since COVID. I think COVID was a big wake-up call for a lot of people to realize that there aren't a lot of protections, that people are looking out for their bottom line before they're looking out for their employees, and that if we want to protect ourselves, we have to do it ourselves. And so, Jessica Swarner, like I said, she's here. She's been following the labor movement growth here in Arizona pretty closely. And I think a lot of it just has to do with simply getting information out there on how to unionize. We're seeing a lot of movement in places like Starbucks, in places like dispensaries. There's a lot of industries where people just don't think that that's something they can do. They hear about these big labor movements, the teachers union, the nurses union, the police union. Oh, that's kind of a different, different ball game. But they hear about this and they think, oh, there's like thousands of people. There's thousands of nurses in my city. I'm one of like 6 employees in a coffee shop. They don't know where to begin. And so I think just getting people information to say, here's how you unionize. If you have 6 people in your store and 4 of you want to form a union, you can do it. That's enough. And then you have the backing of this large organization that's, that represents thousands of people across the country. I think that's first and foremost. And then finding labor leaders like Layla Dalton here in Arizona, who can really rally people to the cause. People who understand the movement because they've been building it, and can help other people grow, grow in their own sphere. I think from that point, just because we're starting in such a bad position in Arizona, the next step there, once the power is built, push for things like ending right to work laws, working with groups like Lucha, who did push for, raising the minimum wage, mandatory sick leave. Those are things that, the labor unions fight for as well. And so finding places where there's overlap so people can work together. I think that can make a huge difference. But it is just really amazing to see people taking advantage of this moment.
Yeah.
Well, and I was a member of the newspaper guild when I worked as a newspaper reporter in New York, and we had fantastic benefits and excellent rights, and they would even reimburse tuition for taking classes to improve your coverage. So I think unions are fantastic based on my personal experience. Mike, back to you. Sorry to interrupt.
Not at all. So yeah, I just wanted to note that Elizabeth Warren recently dropped a bill to ban right to work states, which, hooray for that. Elizabeth, deserves our love every day. Another sort of a follow-up question to that, ancillary but not really directly on point, is how is the Copper Courier organized? I mean, I understand you're a public benefit corporation, I think. Can you explain what that is, and what kind of union, if any, does the Copper Courier belong to?
Yeah. So, I would say, first of all, I would love for our newsrooms to unionize. I've advocated it since the beginning, and so it's something that's been talked about, and hopefully we can make that a reality. As far as our organizational structure, like you said, we're a public good corporation. What that means is that our parent company, Good Information, has a board of directors. We're a startup, and so we have investors, but our responsibility isn't to the investors. It isn't to our board. Most public companies, their goal and their priority legally is to make their company or their corporation as much money as possible, is so that investors get a return on their investment. A public good corporation is different in the sense that our priority is beholden to our values as an organization. And so our values are, upholding democracy, preventing climate change, protecting women's reproductive rights, uplifting the voices of people who normally don't have access and who are, downtrodden. And so if our reporting, hurts one of our investors' bottom line, that doesn't matter to us. And they go into investing with our organization knowing that our priority is our values as an organization. So Good Information is the parent company. We've launched 7 newsrooms throughout the United States, only in states that are targets to misinformation and disinformation. So here, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Virginia. We have one outlet in Florida that specifically is for Boricuas, or Puerto Ricans who have moved from Puerto Rico to Florida, because there's a lot of misinformation being thrown into those communities. So yeah, but other than that, we work fairly independently here at the state, although we do have national policy directors and political editors who help us with the legwork of tying the national to local, mostly so we can focus on the local aspect here.
All right. Barbara Warren has her hand up. Go ahead, Dr. Warren.
Getting back to your comments about outreach to Indigenous people and people of color, I have writers sent about 200 or more postcards up to Native American lands about getting people out to vote. And I'm wondering how successful that effort has been. They've gotten a lot of us involved in helping to just guide people to their local representatives and get engaged and prepare to vote, maybe get registered, whatever. But has that been successful? Are you aware of that?
I mean, I can only speak from, for our organization experience, and I can talk in the past in my work with campaigns, that for the most part, any outreach has a positive benefit. Door to door is obviously, it's incredibly effective because it's neighbors talking to neighbors. But things like postcard campaigns, lit drops, that sort of thing, can also be very effective, as long as that's how people get their information. If people, rely on PO boxes, which a lot of people in indigenous communities do on tribal lands, they may not check that regularly, or they may not have access to check it regularly. And a lot of what we do in our organization is we do digital targeting to get information to people who need it, which again doesn't work very well in communities where they don't have reliable access to internet. But it does work well, with people who, are renters who have to move a lot, who may not get all their mail on time, but they do have their phone and they have access to the internet. So I would, as far as outreach, the important thing to keep in mind is reaching people where they are. If they don't check their mail, but they do go through their front door, then yeah, a door hanger is probably gonna be pretty helpful. If they're in a gated community, it might be hard to knock on their door, but you can probably get in their social feed.
Okay, back to you, Mike. I see you have your hand up. Is there a question in the chat?
No, but I would certainly encourage people to post one there if they don't want to appear on camera. But I have a question of my own. I was wondering, maybe Cameron could talk about access to politicians and how that might affect, particularly your organization, being that you have a kind of openly progressive slant. Are you having difficulty with Arizona officials granting you access and granting you time to be able to report on them?
I would say that the double-edged sword of having so much access to information and for candidates to basically run their own, mini media outlets where they can just talk to their followers on social media. That I would say has done more harm than, our, open positions on where we stand as far as progressive politics. We get the same canned responses that the Arizona Republic does, and we get ignored on the same questions. I think it really comes down to just some candidates value traditional media, some candidates value that outreach, and some of them are much more insular. And then some of it depends on the question you ask. Chris Mays, for example, has been very open. Both been incredibly accessible. A surprising amount of legislative candidates are too. I think it is again because they don't have as wide of an audience. Where larger candidates, Carrie Lake, she's never responded to a request to comment for anything. Whereas Katie Hobbs, we have our first interview with her today, but it took that long for us to be able to get access. That said, I have noticed a difference from 2020, just because we have been around longer, we're more established, we're more reputable. More candidates have given us the time of day now than they did in 2020.
Any follow-up, Mike?
Not right now, but I'll give it some thought.
Cameron, I wanted to ask you myself, and I invite everybody on the program to either raise your hand or ask a question in the chat. What do you think are the issues that voters care about, Cameron? The Republicans are focusing on the so-called border crisis and building the wall and inflation. The Democrats are focusing on reproductive rights and protecting the right to vote. What do voters care about in your perspective?
Yeah, depending on how you phrase those issues, I think all of those are of importance to Arizonans. I don't think describing people wanting to come to the United States as a border crisis is an effective or accurate way to portray it. It's, I think, letting people know what's actually happening at the border, why people are coming into the country, how people's lives are being devastated by what we're doing to them as they try to provide a better lives for themselves is important. Obviously, I think we've seen from turnout in different states to voter registration in Arizona that reproductive rights is front and center on the ballot. I think people seeing that a right that was established and accepted being taken away so abruptly was a big wake-up call for people. I believe voter integrity or protecting our election system in terms of protecting our democratic process is important as well. I think something that was mentioned earlier in very simple terms. If you tell someone that early voting could go away, then they're very interested, because that's just that's how almost everyone votes. Inflation, I think, is important in terms of affordability, letting people know, why things are less affordable, why rents are really going up, why costs are going up, the root causes for those things, not just because someone says, this president's in charge and so now inflation magically went up. But letting people know that, we have wealth tax breaks going out, which impact inflation. We don't have any consumer protections for tenants, which is why rents are going up. Those are the sort of things that catch people's attention. Buzzwords like inflation, people hear and get upset about, but when you talk about, rising cost of rent, those are things that people can actually relate to.
Okay. Susie Anderson, go right ahead. I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was wondering what kind of divide in questions, interest do you find from the three, I guess, major metropolitan areas of Tucson, Phoenix, and Flagstaff compared to the rest of rural Arizona? Do you see a great difference in interest in the issues?
Yes and no. I would say that the issues are the same, but how they're approached are differently. In places like Flagstaff, affordability is a huge issue as far as cost of living. If you went to NAU 30 years ago, you could live in Flagstaff after you graduated, stick around for a while. Now, even if you find a good job up there, you probably can't. In Phoenix, that's translated into growing, a rising lack of affordable housing. But people don't just leave, they still want to stay here. So people are living in their cars, they're living in, at motels, they're living in friends' houses or going house to house. They don't have stable housing. And so that's a big issue here. And as far as Tucson, I'd be curious to get input from this group. I think would be probably one of the best ways to learn what's going on the ground. In rural Arizona, affordability in the sense of high-paying jobs coming to areas, as well as access to healthcare. Even before Roe was overturned, there were only 9 abortion clinics in the state that performed the medical procedure. Now there's one that's kind of doing it, but it's very, even they're waiting till this week because there's some court hearings going on. And so I think access to healthcare is really, really big. If someone loses access to a fundamental right, such as abortion, what other healthcare are they not going to be able to access? What once was 1 hour away is now 4 hours away. And so I think that's one of the big ones in rural Arizona.
All right, Paul, take it away.
Camaron, could you elaborate a little bit on what you just said? So wealth inequality, because you led for that before the last question. And Susie, thank you for your thing about Phoenix and rural and Tucson and so on and so forth. Do voters, Camaron, do readers and voters, probably two different groups, do they understand the impact of and the consequences of the enormous wealth inequality in Arizona? You mentioned jobs, you mentioned medical care, no rich people care about. You mentioned rent, cost of housing. No rich people they don't care about that here, right, for themselves. Could you elaborate on that, my friend, in terms of what you think voters see as the context as opposed to a naturally occurring event?
Yeah, definitely. I think what we really try to do is break down these issues in ways that are very relatable. You can try and describe how much $1 billion is, but it's hard. It's hard to grasp it. It's a lot, it's more than you have. And that it's probably more than you'll ever see in your lifetime. And so what we try and do is let people know that the problems they're having with affordability, you're facing eviction, that's not something to be ashamed of, not something to be embarrassed about. In fact, it's happening to more people now in Arizona than ever before. And that's happening because billionaires, these wealthy corporations are buying property and renting it back to you at more than you could ever afford. You might have been able to afford that mortgage 5 years ago, but now you're paying more than what the mortgage would cost in rent. And, and your wages aren't going up. And so I think tying it in those terms is very helpful. Letting people know, and again, this goes to our sourcing as well. We talk to people who face eviction, talk to people who, haven't seen a pay raise in decades, people who are trying to survive on 3 minimum wage jobs, and then connecting that to these bigger issues of, while this is happening, Arizona Republicans in the legislature cut taxes for millionaires and billionaires. Well, you are probably going to pay more than you did before. Yeah. So I hope that it's a complicated thing to try and explain in short, simple terms. And so we try and just hammer that information to just remind people, and ask people if the way we're presenting the information is relevant to them.
Cameron, a question I've got is not only as a precinct committee person and a progressive writer, is which races are you following? So, of course, you want to follow all of them. I'll certainly be up late on election night, but the three that I think I'm following the most closely are for Arizona governor. You've got Katie Hobbs, who protected democracy during the 2020 election, versus Carrie Lake, who is sort of a QAnon weirdo. The second one is Secretary of State, where we have Adrian Fontes, who has experience running an election, versus Mark Fincham, who is just, he dresses up as a cowboy and was kicked off the police force in Michigan, where he came from. And then the third one is Attorney General. You've got Chris Mays, who's an attorney. She's been in court. She has experience, versus Abram Hamadah, who, just continues to lie about his citizenship, his parents' citizenship, and so forth. But so those are the three that I think are the key races. What do you think, Cameron?
Yeah. So, as far as these statewide races, I kind of like to look at them in terms of where the Democratic candidates stand, because the Republicans down the ballot, they are all Trump endorsed MAGA Republicans, and so it's basically the same person 5 different ways. They may have some different eccentricities, but they all have virtually the same platform. And so I think looking at the Democratic candidates will give us a better idea at like the pulse of Arizona as a whole. Like you mentioned, Katie Hobbs is a very long time legislator in Arizona. She defended the 2020 elections. She was voted in by popular vote in 2018. Compared to Adrian Fontes, he's, I would say very much more of a progressive firebrand, who's more vocal, who is, less careful in his speaking, and who lost his countywide election in 2020. The results of those 2 elections, I think, are going to give us a very good idea of where Arizona's electorate actually is. I think you have Secretary of State or Superintendent of Public Instruction. This long time, Tea Party Republican and Tom Horn versus Kathy Hoffman, who first time elected in 2018, very reliable, very strong candidate, very popular in, I believe she actually won by a higher vote count than Katie Hobbs in 2018. But one of the things Republicans fearmonger about right now is education. So how big does the fearmongering actually play in the results of the election? So that's kind of how I'm looking at the statewide races. Then there's a few legislative races that I think are going to be very close. But unfortunately, a lot of it's just going to come down to how much money is in the state. And I think what we've seen the past, 3, 4, 5 cycles is that more and more money is coming into Arizona. But that's a totally different issue.
Mike, go ahead.
Well, I would actually like to hear Cameron prognosticate about those congressional races that he's watching and weigh in on the Kelly Masters race.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with Kelly Masters because that one I think I can be the most cautiously optimistic about. Mark Kelly has proven himself as being wildly popular among Arizona electorate. He votes, in a way that's more popular than our senior senator, I would say, on most issues.
Yeah.
Whereas he is up against like an untried, untested, unvetted, far right Republican candidate. Someone who has openly, vocally on the record said that he doesn't believe in democracy. And so I believe like that is a very stark contrast. And so I'm, yeah, and I think we're seeing a lot in, again, a lot of it goes back to money. He's not getting that national money in his race, like Mark Kelly is. And so that one, like I said, I can be cautiously optimistic about. I've been proven wrong before, but Martha McSally was a much stronger candidate than Blake Masters, and I think I can leave it. As they're both from Tucson, so I'm sure all of you have heard both of those names for a long time. As far as congressional races, Tom O'Halloran's race is big. I've talked to him. He's a really nice guy. I feel bad for him because no matter what happens, he's always, I feel like, in one of the toughest spots. And it happened again. You think he's going to be safe, and then now he's in a Republican +8. But he's proven himself to be someone who can win over independent voters time and time again. He's done it in the past. Again, he is a long known entity. He's a former Republican. He's won tougher races than this. And so I think a lot of it's going to come down to, the MAGA Republican base, in addition with, the usual dissatisfaction with the party in power at midterms versus his incumbency and his record. And so I think if he's able to play off that, and if he's able to remind people that, regardless of what you think of the president, regardless of what you think of, of my opponent, here's who I am. I think he's got a decent shot. Yeah.
The one that focuses us here in Tucson is, of course, Karen Engel's race against Juan Ciscomani.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you're seeing more uphill battles in Tucson than I'm sure you'd like. I think Engel's an incredibly strong candidate. I think she's going to have a harder time. She has less name recognition, I would say, than O'Halloran. I believe hers is more of a toss-up, though. Is that correct?
R+2, I think. Okay,
so yeah, she has a stronger chance. I think honestly, a lot of that race is going to come down to people like you down there on the ground, grassroots efforts. One thing I've seen as far as national attention, for better or for worse, is that a lot of money gets poured into the Senate race. A lot of money gets poured into some of the congressional races, but a lot of time that money doesn't trickle down ballot. And so, if once, Kelly's campaign, if they're out there campaigning for Kelly, make sure you've got lit about Kirsten Engel. Make sure you've got information about those down ballot candidates. Because a lot of times, if money is for one candidate, they're only bringing it in for that one. And so you kind of got to do the rest, in your precincts, and just with the candidates you support. Another one I think is good. I think is going to be close, is with Jevin Hodge and David Schweikert. It's a new district for Schweikert. And so that, shakes up his comfort that he's had for the past, 8-10 years or so. But he's a name. He's been there for a very long time. Jevin's new. I think those three would be the closest ones in my consideration.
Barbara Warren has her hand up. Go right ahead, Barbara, with your follow-up.
I didn't hear you mention the Corporation Commission, and I'm wondering how you think that election's going to go and what we can get accomplished if we have the right people elected.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I'm sorry. There's, some of the races are a little bit more difficult to break down just because they're either, like that. Also, the treasurer's race, I think, is very important. But the candidates are more low profile. The issues are a lot more nuanced. And so I think with the Corporation Commission, Kuby and Kennedy, I know, are very strong candidates. She's going for re-election, and so I'm blanking on the third. So I apologize.
I think it's just two. I'm
Is
not
it,
sure.
okay, it is just the two. Okay. I mean, I think the important thing in that race is to find a simple aspect of what the Corporation Commission does, and being able to explain it. Because if you're from a different state, which 70% of Arizonans are, you may not have even ever heard of a Corporation Commission. You don't know what that is. And so then you get into what they do, what it's entailed. Like I think Corporation Commission is a very complex, very broad role. And so I would say finding whatever issue they touch on that is important to your local electorate. Do they care about rates going up? Do they care about combating climate change? Most Arizonans do. They care about water issues. If the candidates and if the people who are canvassing for them can find ways to simply break down those issues, I think that'll encourage people to act. But I think, and this is just me personally, things like Corporation Commission, like Treasurer's Office, even to Attorney General to an extent, a lot of times Republicans win those races because people don't know what those positions do, and they are interested and they just want to split the ballot. There's a lot of independent voters who would say, of course I'm voting for Mark Kelly. Of course I'm voting for Katie Hobbs. But I want there to be, this idea in my head of balance. So I'm going to throw some Republicans in there too. I've heard that Republicans are good about, this or that. And so I'm going to check Republican on the ballot. And so I think for some of those more nuanced positions, it's important to tie the ballot together. And I think you see that becoming more and more important the farther down the ballot you go. And that's what we saw in Maricopa County in 2020 anyway. Biden won, Kelly won, and then the entire county went Republican. And so it's people who split the ticket who I think you got to kind of keep in mind.
Okay, Mike, you got one more? We're almost out of time.
I just want to hear from Cameron what his plans and aspirations for the Copper Courier are in the coming year or two, heading, once we get over this current election and we're looking at 24 in a presidential race. What are you looking to do with the Courier?
Yeah, as much as we can without exhausting ourselves. We'd love to expand. Right now we have one employee in Yuma. The other reporters were all in Maricopa County. I'd love to get a reporter in Tucson or a reporter up in either Flagstaff area, just so we can have more boots on the ground, more people covering more of the state. I'd also love to expand our reach so that we do that our information is getting out to people who need it. As much as we love the support of all of you, to follow and share our information, our report is useless if we're not getting it to people who are unsure about voting. A lot of our audience is people who voted for the first time in 2018 or the first time in 2020. And so if we're not getting the information that we're reporting on to those people, what are we doing? Yeah. And so, so your help is instrumental in that, in letting people know that we exist, that our information is reliable, can be trusted, and is accessible. We don't ever plan on having a paywall or anything like that. We want the news that we report to be able to go to everyone.
Yeah, I saw you add a voter hub on the website, which is not the usual for a news website. So congratulations on that. Good job.
Thanks. Yeah, what good is that information if we're preventing people from accessing it?
Okay, folks, we are out of time. Cameron, I want to thank you very much for making yourself available to Democrats of Greater Tucson. And I think all of us wonder if you could bring our program to a conclusion. Tell us, what's the best way to subscribe to the Copper Courier? Is it Facebook, the email newsletter? And then finally, how can we support your independent journalism and keep it alive?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Like we mentioned earlier, if you go to coppercourier.com, there's all of our social links, a link to subscribe to our newsletter. Wherever you're active online, we'd appreciate your support. If you would value from getting our newsletter every day, if it's something you think you can forward to people, definitely subscribe to that. If you are active on Facebook, if you like to share posts, if you're in groups on Facebook where our reporting would benefit from, and I'm not talking just, if you're in the LD18 Democrats group, that's great. But if you're part of mutual aid groups, if you're a part of, a Facebook group that helps people to prevent eviction, share our stuff in there so that our reporting can help people stay in their homes. That sort of thing. If you're active on Instagram, we have a pretty large following on there. We'd like to grow it. Basically anywhere where you share your information. If you're interested in supporting us financially, we can definitely benefit from that. We have a donate page on our website as well. You can do one time, you can do monthly, or also, probably my bosses wouldn't appreciate me saying this, but if you think your money can go better to down ballot candidates who can put those $5, $10, $15, $20 further, now through November, I would recommend donating to them. Money's a thing in our political system, unfortunately. Until the game changes, we kind of got to play the game.
All right. Thank you so much, Cameron. We really appreciate all of the points you made. I know from the chat that people find you very interesting and very engaging.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Thanks for having me.